On the evening of November 7, 1942, the Atlantic Ocean lay beneath an oppressive quiet. Under a sky devoid of moonlight, hundreds of Allied vessels sliced through black waters toward a distant coastline. Crammed within landing craft were thousands of young Americans, most facing their initial encounter with combat. They were not advancing toward Nazi Germany. They were not bound for Italy. Rather, they were approaching French-held North Africa, a region where adversaries remained unclear. Allegiances were uncertain, and delay could mean catastrophe. This was Operation Torch, the first major American amphibious campaign of the Second World War. It was a calculated risk, born of urgency and strategic necessity. By late 1942, the Allied cause confronted tremendous pressure. Britain had survived years of continuous warfare. The Soviet Union remained trapped in a devastating life-or-death conflict on the Eastern Front. The United States, freshly drawn into war following Pearl Harbor, needed to demonstrate that it could deploy, land, and prevail on foreign territory. Torch would serve as that testing ground. The strategy was audacious and divisive. Rather than attacking Europe's heavily defended shoreline directly, Allied commanders decided to invade French North Africa, then administered by the Vichy French government. These forces were not formal Axis partners, yet they were not Allied supporters either. Their reaction to an invasion remained completely unknown. They might capitulate, they might offer resistance, or they might battle fiercely to protect their holdings. Nobody could say with certainty. Leadership of the Western Offensive was assigned to George S. Patton, a man already recognized for his fervor, precision, and absolute conviction in attacking warfare. Patton was directed to command the Western Task Force, a formation of approximately 32,000 soldiers across hundreds of miles of ocean to establish positions on the Moroccan shoreline. The magnitude of this endeavor was without precedent for the United States. There would be no practice under hostile conditions, no room for mistakes, and minimal dependable intelligence regarding what lay waiting on the landing zones. Patton grasped the implications. Defeat at Torch would not simply claim lives, it would destroy Allied faith in American command and postpone any subsequent invasion of Europe. Victory, conversely, would unlock the Mediterranean, isolate Axis troops in North Africa, and establish the United States as a commanding military force. For Patton, this was not simply an assignment, it was a trial by fire. As the invasion armada neared the shoreline, Patton circulated among his officers with composed determination. He recognized that uncertainty was unavoidable in warfare, but immobility was inexcusable. His belief was straightforward. Action generates possibilities, and hesitation invites catastrophe. Whatever opposition the French might present, Patton planned to confront it directly. When daybreak arrived on November 8, 1942, the quiet would shatter. Artillery would roar, partnerships would be challenged, and America's first substantial entry into global ground combat would commence, not against its acknowledged enemies, but against former associates whose choices would influence the trajectory of the war. As daybreak arrived on November 8, 1942, the Moroccan shoreline materialized from obscurity. What had been theoretical planning documents and uncertain reports now became tangible: coastlines, waves, and approaching gunfire. The Western Task Force initiated its landings at 3 essential locations: Port Lyautey, Fedhala, and Safi. Each site presented distinct hazards, but all carried one disturbing reality. The opposition was French, not German. At Fedhala, combat began immediately. As landing vessels approached shore, French coastal artillery commenced firing. compelling American soldiers to exit under turbulent circumstances. Craft ran aground in incorrect positions. Formations became dispersed. Leaders struggled to rally their troops through haze, yelling, and detonating ordnance. What had been envisioned as a rapid landing transformed into a desperate struggle for existence. Yet, despite disorder, the troops pushed onward, propelled by urgency and terror of being trapped against the ocean. Further south at Safi, the goal was aggressive. Capture the harbor undamaged to permit swift offloading of armored vehicles and equipment. Here, naval artillery proved critical. American battleships maneuvered perilously near to land, pounding French emplacements with focused bombardment. The risk succeeded. Though opposition was determined, French defenses crumbled under continuous assault, permitting U.S. troops to seize vital installations before they could be demolished. At Port Lyautey, the circumstances were more intricate. French soldiers occupied formidable defensive arrangements near the airstrip, and early attacks faltered. Intelligence shortcomings became painfully apparent. Charts were unreliable. Enemy capability had been miscalculated. Yet retreat was never contemplated. Instead, American formations reorganized, circumvented opposition where feasible, and continued pressing forward despite accumulating losses. Throughout the confrontations, one doctrine guided battlefield choices: sustain momentum. Instructions emphasized relentless pressure, even when coordination collapsed or strategies disintegrated. This method reflected a conscious philosophy. Strategic aims would advance like an irresistible force, while field leaders adjusted methods as situations evolved. Waiting for flawless information was viewed as more perilous than advancing with incomplete knowledge. The most debatable choice occurred near Casablanca. Despite partial intelligence regarding French deployments and motivations, the attack proceeded. The danger was substantial. A protracted engagement could transform the city into evidence of American inadequacy. Instead, continuous naval bombardment and persistent ground pressure began to fracture French determination. Vessels were destroyed or driven back to port. Defensive positions splintered. The mental burden of overpowering firepower became impossible to endure. By the conclusion of the first day, it was evident that Operation Torch would not fail under its own boldness. Though losses surpassed projections and organization remained imperfect, the landings had established strongholds along the shoreline. American troops were positioned, advancing inland and adjusting swiftly under hostile fire. The offensive had revealed brutal realities about inexperience, about intelligence deficiencies, and about the unpredictable character of confronting former partners. But it had also demonstrated something else. The United States Army, though unproven, could withstand chaos and maintain forward motion. The struggle for North Africa was no longer abstract. It was developing, coastline by coastline, mile by mile. By November 9, 1942, the initial disorder of the landings had evolved into a precarious new stage, decision-making under duress. American troops were positioned, but triumph was not yet secured. French formations still controlled strategic locations, Casablanca remained disputed, and intelligence assessments were fragmentary at best. It was during this interval that the defining attribute of the operation surfaced: not weaponry, not strength in numbers, but command resolve. At the heart of that resolve stood George S. Patton. Patton's methodology during Operation Torch adhered to a distinct philosophy. Strategic objectives would progress without pause, like an unstoppable current. Tactical implementation, however, would stay adaptable, reacting immediately to opportunities or vulnerabilities. This approach rejected caution founded on uncertainty. In Patton's judgment, Waiting for complete intelligence was itself a deadly error. Nowhere was this challenged more intensely than in the sustained assault against Casablanca. Intelligence arriving at headquarters was fragmentary and occasionally conflicting. Some French commanders seemed prepared to discuss terms. Others persisted fighting with conviction. Coastal fortifications, though damaged, were not entirely silenced. Advisors cautioned that pressing too aggressively might harden opposition or escalate losses needlessly. Yet Patton perceived hesitation as the more serious threat. Any interruption, he maintained, would permit French forces to consolidate, reinforce defenses, or sabotage essential port facilities. The directive was issued: maintain pressure. Naval artillery resumed their bombardment of coastal batteries and harbor structures. Inland, American formations progressed systematically but continuously, searching for vulnerabilities and capitalizing on any indication of diminishing resistance. The instruction to field leaders was explicit: forward advancement must not cease. Even when coordination failed, individual judgment was promoted. Commanders were expected to take action, not delay. This perpetual advance carried psychological consequences. French officers confronted a mounting awareness that the Americans would not withdraw, bargain mid-conflict, or pull back to reconsider. The sheer tenacity of the offensive began to undermine morale. What had originally been portrayed as a defensive position became a consideration of unavoidability. By November 11th, the consideration was resolved. French opposition disintegrated, and a ceasefire was negotiated. Combat ended across the Western Task Force's operational zone. The artillery fell silent, not because every emplacement had been obliterated, but because continued resistance no longer appeared rational. The unstoppable current had accomplished its purpose. Yet the victory was not exclusively military. The approach through which it was obtained raised enduring questions. Losses had exceeded forecasts. Choices had been executed with constrained intelligence. And American troops had discovered, at significant expense, what contemporary amphibious warfare required. Torch revealed deficiencies in coordination, communication, and readiness, even as it showcased adaptability and determination. For Patton, the result confirmed his confidence in aggressive command. The operation strengthened his conviction that warfare rewarded audacity over prudence. But it also imposed a substantial responsibility on leadership, one that reached beyond ceasefire arrangements and battlefield achievement. With the ceasefire obtained, Operation Torch transitioned into a new phase. The fighting had concluded, but the ramifications of victory, political, social, and moral, were only beginning to materialize. The signing of the ceasefire on November 11, 1942, did not deliver relief. It delivered obligation. With hostilities concluded, American leaders were compelled to address a challenge no less difficult than combat itself: how to convert conquest into alliance. For George S. Patton, the shift from battlefield commander to diplomatic negotiator occurred almost instantly. French governance in Morocco had not disappeared, it had splintered. Civilian management, harbor functions, transportation systems, and public security all demanded urgent attention. Any error could provoke disorder or drive former opponents into outright antagonism. Patton recognized that victory could be reversed by poor administration. Military achievement had to be accompanied by political steadiness. Patton initiated a sequence of consultations with French authorities aimed at restoring collaboration rather than enforcing submission. The purpose was explicit: merge former adversaries against the mutual Axis danger. These exchanges were practical rather than emotional. French leaders were guaranteed their ongoing participation in regional administration, while American forces concentrated on protecting infrastructure and preserving order. It was an uncomfortable alliance, created not through confidence, but through requirement. One of the most emblematic instances of this shift happened when Patton convened with the Sultan of Morocco. The meeting illustrated a wider acknowledgement that North Africa was not simply a war zone. It was a living territory with profound traditions, extensive histories, and its own political intricacies. Regard for indigenous customs became more than politeness. It was a strategic imperative. Stability relied upon it. In his personal records, Patton observed the remarkable contradictions surrounding him. Historic communities existed alongside contemporary artillery installations. Conventional agricultural methods persisted even as military columns traveled through. Markets resumed operations while soldiers still erected defensive structures nearby. The war had not eliminated Moroccan existence. It had converged with it. Patton conveyed respect for the fortitude of the native population and the persistence of cultural identity beneath the stress of occupation and invasion. Yet underneath this regard existed friction. Military requirements frequently conflicted with cultural conservation. Routes were seized. Structures were appropriated. Civilian existence bent beneath the pressure of operational necessities. Patton acknowledged the contradiction even as he embraced it. For him, the war's objective remained supreme, defeating the Axis. Cultural awareness mattered, but it could not supersede strategic demands. This friction, regard alongside severity, characterized Patton's behavior in Morocco. He could value the territory and its inhabitants while simultaneously imposing the requirements of total warfare. It was an equilibrium that few commanders achieved gracefully, and one that historians persistently examine. Operation Torch had produced a military triumph, but its genuine challenge existed in what followed. Collaboration with French forces was re-established. Infrastructure was restored. Supply routes began flowing eastward. The Mediterranean, long contested, was becoming available to Allied transportation once more. As steadiness established itself, Patton's role in Morocco approached its end. A new assignment awaited him, one that would examine the lessons acquired during Torch against a far more dangerous adversary. The war was shifting east, and so was Patton. As steadiness returned to Morocco, Operation Torch disclosed its deeper meaning, not merely as a victorious invasion, but as a watershed in Allied assurance and competence. The operation had confirmed that American forces could organize, implement, and maintain large-scale amphibious operations under authentic combat circumstances. It also revealed inadequacies that would inform future triumphs. Defective intelligence, coordination difficulties, and the severe price of inexperience. These lessons would not be disregarded. With North Africa's western boundary secured, focus shifted eastward. Axis forces, German and Italian, were concentrating in Tunisia, preparing for a far more substantial confrontation. It was there that the lessons of Torch would be completely examined. Patton was reassigned to lead the two corps, charged with restoring discipline and combat proficiency after early defeats against veteran German formations. The importance of this mission highlighted Torch's function as preparation for larger, more lethal operations to come. Ceremonies and honors followed the Moroccan operation, recognizing both American and French achievements. Former opponents now assembled together, connected by a common objective. This transformation, from confrontation to collaboration, was one of Torch's most lasting legacies. It proved that war could reconstruct partnerships as rapidly as it reorganized battle lines. The Mediterranean shipping channels reopened, resources flowed, the strategic pressure intensified around Axis forces in North Africa. Yet Operation Torch left behind unresolved questions that reach beyond military accomplishment. Patton's unstoppable current approach, while successful, compelled historians and observers alike to scrutinize the moral burden of command choices. Advancing with incomplete intelligence preserved time and sustained momentum. But at what price? Civilian disruption, cultural pressure, and avoidable losses remained as troubling consequences of decisive action. The operation became a case study in the friction between operational requirement and ethical obligation. Patton himself contemplated these contradictions. His records reveal appreciation for Moroccan culture alongside unflinching recognition of war's impositions. He comprehended that leadership demanded choices with permanent consequences. To hesitate might condemn a mission. To advance might damage a civilization. Torch compelled commanders to decide repeatedly, without certainty, and accept the results. From a strategic viewpoint, the operation's influence was irrefutable. Allied dominance of North Africa prepared the path for the invasion of Sicily, the downfall of Italian fascism, and the eventual liberation of Western Europe. Torch signaled America's emergence as a global military power capable of sustained offensive campaigns. It transformed uncertainty into assurance and theory into reality. In hindsight, Operation Torch represents a moment when history shifted quietly but conclusively. There was no single dramatic revelation, no immediate defeat of the enemy. Instead, success emerged through persistence, adaptation, and the readiness to act despite uncertainty. Patton's command embodied that reality: imperfect, forceful, and effective. On the coastlines of North Africa, America learned how to conduct modern warfare. It learned that victory required more than strength. It required wisdom. Operation Torch taught both lessons, inscribed in sand, steel, and sacrifice.